You know what I realized? This is an incredibly spicy book. I decided today I would roll up my sleeves and actually talk to you about how spicy this book is. It is week 13 of Let's Make a Book Baby, where I am taking you all the way from the very beginning of me writing this silly werewolf book until I publish it. If you haven't heard about it so far, the two main characters are Ari and Marcus. Ari is a trans guy, Marcus is a cis guy, but since this is an Omegaverse book, they have wolf shifter forms, so they can shapeshift into wolves at will, and their wolf selves have like their own type of personality and gender identities. So they are both omegas, but Marcus is also a gender fluid wolf, and that's going to come into play because we're going to talk about power dynamics in spicy scenes. Are you ready? I've written a lot of steamy romance books so far. The way that I define them is probably different from how you might define them because I have noticed everyone has different definitions for this. But basically, a more general consensus is that if you are writing high spice romance, usually that implies that there is still a lot of plot involved alongside the romance. But if you're writing something like erotica, then that implies that you are mostly writing those intimate scenes between your characters. So some people categorize my books in either or, even though I have a lot of plot in my books. Even my werewolf books, like that's why I always tell you in these videos so far that I have been doing a lot of B and C plots. That is just kind of how I write in general. I like to have characters unpack trauma or their internalized ableism if they have a chronic illness or different parts of their identities. And that's because I write characters who are primarily in the LGBTQ plus community and also have either a mental or physical disability of some kind, and I really enjoy that. I think it works well with spicy scenes personally, which is something that people might not usually combine, but I think that having that solid character building beneath the relationship that you're working on is really important when writing spicy scenes. So if you're curious about writing scenes like this, I wanted to give you some of my thoughts on it since I have gotten questions about that both online and in person. And I also won an award this past year for one of the steamy scenes, literally, in Unraveling With You. It was the 2025 Indieverse Award for Hottest Consent Scene. So thank you again if anyone here watching voted for that. But I've been told that people like my steamy scenes because of how emotionally involved they are. So I wanted to tell you a bit of how I do that. Also, explain to you what's kind of funny about this is that because I have OCD and PTSD, I don't usually talk about this. So this is going to be just as interesting for me as it might be for you. I get really hung up on this and like worried about if it's okay to talk about things like this or not, even though I know logically it's like something that shouldn't be considered taboo. Like it's another type of way different species relate to one another or interact with one another or bond. Of course, I also have to deal with general censorship on social media or YouTube, so I'm gonna have to use different words like spicy scenes instead of sex scenes. Like that's just how it kind of goes here. So with all that being said, let's get into it. My number one thought usually about these scenes or writing spicy scenes is basically like writing an action scene. They're just performing a different action than beating someone up. I mean, debatable on what type of spice you're writing, but that's beside the point. Since we were talking about Ari and Marcus in particular, I'm going to just use them as an example. Ari as a character, I originally thought of him as very reserved just because he's quiet, but you know, I should have known better. I wrote a whole series featuring his parents, and now that he has his own completely standalone book, I should have already learned my lesson that the shy alpha in My Shy Alpha, like his dad, is not that shy in bed. He's also not that shy in general. He is just quiet. He's like a stoic person. And of course his son is like that, and I wrote him to be like that. But then once I really got into writing his character, I was like, oh, he is like a powerhouse. Like, he has a really strong personality. He just isn't like vocally loud about it. And poor Marcus. Marcus, since he is gender fluid, he has trauma based around an incident that happened with a group of alphas. But he was very, very young. So this basically got coded in his brain that alpha equals dangerous. And now he has to come to terms with that because his inner, very sexual side is very alpha-esque in terms of the power dynamics that we are discussing. The personal take that I have around this is that I still love to involve consent in my books. A lot of people write their books in all different ways around that. That is how I write mine. And you can still play with power dynamics in that way. What I like to do is, if I have this character like Ari, who's actually a very bold person, I think it's actually very interesting if he doesn't prefer to take the lead, but then since Marcus is having this internal struggle and conflict within himself, that is an easy way for me to use these spicy scenes as a means for him to heal that side of himself that he is in a disconnect with. So he can come to terms sorry, I shouldn't say that word to what he should he can accept himself. I'm embarrassed. I can't get over it. He can accept himself through having those very nice, fun interactions with Ari, who wants to be dominated very badly. I think that that's very entertaining because otherwise Ari has to be a very strong person. So any way that I can kind of reverse expectations or add in some type of twists like that, it literally is a plot twist and a way to make spicy scenes more interesting because you're learning about the characters through these scenes and it's still moving the plot along. It's not just like, oh, I can skip this, because I think that makes it much more involved, much more fun, and allows those scenes throughout the book, if you have multiple, to all bring something new to the table without it feeling repetitive, because the action itself can be a little bit repetitive. Like you can put people in different positions, but they're still doing the same thing. You know what I mean? The other part that I really like to involve in this, and that is very important with these two characters, is some type of emotional connection and furthering their emotional connection and relationship dynamics. With these two, for example, they are childhood best friends, but they've been long distance, and so they haven't had a lot of in-person time together. It's usually limited to a short week visit, but they keep in touch, keep in contact very regularly, like you would with any best friend. Because of that distance and some very confusing moments they've had with each other, they have not really expressed their true romantic feelings for each other before. So by putting them into these spicy scenes, that is a very new scenario for them. These are the times where you can play with, okay, how much experience has this person had with relationships or intimacy, and how does that affect how they behave in these scenes? It brings something else interesting to the table, I feel like, to where, like I said, you are still learning more about them. And so both of these characters, we have been calling them just two clueless men in love. That is like the trope for this book. They have had such strong feelings for each other that they didn't think was mutual, that they haven't dated anybody else. And so that means they're going to be kind of awkward, which I think is funny and cute. But it also provides them an opportunity to communicate with each other and show how they're growing with their communication to work this out physically. They have to collaborate to perform these spicy scenes and figure each other out and learn what each other likes or doesn't like. And I think that is very fun, because I actually think that bringing consent into that conversation adds a different level of spiciness to it, to where they're forced to vocally express, I want X, Y, and Z, or I don't want X, Y, and Z. And then when a character like remembers that, that's extra hot because it's like, oh, they care. That's probably one of the main things I like to focus on when I'm writing these scenes in an emotional way that I think that readers have been drawn to, and like that's what I'm assuming that they are connecting with when they're giving me feedback, that they feel like they appreciate the emotional side of those steamy scenes. On top of that, I just like to write a lot of detail. So when I was first panicking about writing any type of steamy scenes back in the day, I looked this up a lot, and a lot of people, authors before me, had the advice to either go like 0 or 100%. And I am someone who kind of does that in general, so I kind of went the 100% side. Not kind of. I like to describe everything, but I find the steamy scenes that just have Marcus does this, Ari does this, starts to feel stale, and it starts to feel not as entertaining or engaging. So what I like to do is being like, Marcus does this, which causes this, and that's just basically a literary technique in general of cause and effect. And it's basically like act and react. Like there's a lot of different names for it, but what you want to do in your writing is not just show what happens to your character, but how do they respond to that? Because every person is so individual that can give them a lot of life. I really lean into that with these spicy scenes. If a character is doing some type of action, how does this other character respond? So usually it's a good thing, but let's say it isn't, and then they have to push back against that person and be like, hey, let's tone it down or do something else. I want to still make sure that we know how they're feeling inside first, because the joy of reading fiction like this is that you are inside the character's thoughts in some way. Even if it's like third person, you're getting some type of omnipresent view living inside of their head for a bit. I think it's really important for these scenes to add that extra immersive experience to where you're like, oh, I know what he's feeling because I am hearing about all his bodily sensations, what's making him think about, how he's reacting to that, and that adds a lot of interest. Okay, well, what's he gonna do next? What is Marcus gonna do next? And X, Y, and Z. In terms of how that has impacted Marcus in this situation, I think it is drawing him out, and so his character development is also then cycling back into the spicy scene. So the spicy scene is helping him develop, but then his development is making him perform different actions that he might not have if he didn't develop this far throughout the book, which is very intriguing and thrilling, because you're like, oh, he is doing this thing that you didn't think that he would do because you didn't think he was that type of person, but then you're like, oh, he must really be into Ari if he's doing this. Like, so that adds some extra interest and dynamics into the spicy scenes that I think it is very fun to play with. Those are my thoughts on how to write spicy scenes. So if you have been following along and you want to know more about these specific scenes that I have been writing, let me give you a rundown without like getting into too much detail to where you're not going to be able to watch this because it gets demonetized. Daddy Google is going to punish us. I'm sorry. Forget I said that. I'm so sorry. What Marcus has come to discover is that Ari likes to tease him and use a lot of nonverbal communication with him, which still can involve consent. And I find that very interesting to play with because, like, I personally feel if someone is really paying attention to another person, it's still possible to figure these things out and figure out if someone is giving consent. But the verbal side is also important because sometimes someone can go into a trauma state where they will freeze, and then we don't know what they're actually feeling because it's like either they're masking it on the outside or they're just playing along in order to protect themselves and being like, oh sure, you can do that, and they're not actually wanting that. With that being said, I think it's also important to actually try to notice those things within the people that we are interacting with in general with any type of scenarios. Some people, of course, have different abilities on how they can perceive different social interactions, and that's okay, but of course we still then have to work around that and make sure that things are still consensual in actual relationships, like in real life. So in this book, we are focusing on consent because of how these characters are. They are very loving towards one another, even as best friends, and very deeply care about one another. Both of them are also extremely observant. So I've had fun making sort of tells for them. So like a character will fidget with their sleeve or something if they're really nervous, and that's like a tell for Ari to notice that Marcus is having a hard time. Marcus has noticed that Ari starts to get a little different if he basically pins him against any surface. And so he notices a sense of comfort for him, but then also draws out some of the sides of Ari that he hides usually. We figure out very quickly in chapter 1 that Ari is a scent disguising master. He has developed an intense skill to completely mask his scent, which is a thing that you talk about a lot in werewolf books, like your pheromones, and if they're upset, then you can smell it if you're a werewolf. Speaking of which, I have a dog hair on my face. Because of that, not a lot of people know what Ari is actually feeling without asking him, because he's also very stoic like his dad, as I mentioned. And so Marcus has figured out a way to allow Ari the space to do that by keeping him in a cuddly, contained place. That means pinning him against a wall or hugging him and squishing him or against something, which is innocent according to them, but you know. Marcus is like, okay, just allow yourself to relax for a minute and just basically free fall your scent, like let it be normal. Which is very spicy thing, because they have scent glands on their neck, because in werewolf books usually they mark each other, and marking involves biting each other in some way. So in my lore they bite their necks, but it is very like erotic experience, which I think is funny. I've talked about this before, but I also find it entertaining. Like there's a lot of zones in the body that can be very nice for some people that you wouldn't normally associate with those types of feelings. And so it's just another area on their specific body that is very vulnerable, and therefore Ari secretly, when Marcus is letting him have that space, has a feeling that he wants to flash his neck to him as if to allow him to mark him. So that should have been a sign for him, but it wasn't. He just thinks that Marcus draws that side out of him, and also that they're not meant to be together, so he's not like allowed to have those feelings for Marcus. They're both kind of feeling each other out in many ways to try to see what the other's thinking, and slowly like being more open with one another. But once they finally have in this book this revelation of like, oh, maybe we can choose to be together even if we aren't destined fated mates or anything, and maybe they are, but they just don't accept that, then that allows them to see like, oh, maybe I can share these secret harbored feelings of like wanting to submit to him, because Ari, as I said, is a very powerful wolf. He doesn't really want to seem submissive in most scenarios, so it's a nice break for him to let his guard down and be himself around Marcus, because he feels like he's very omega, but he's still badass, and that's like what he's trying to debunk in the werewolf world, being like, anyone can be a strong wolf despite anything about them. So anyway, that is what I'm working on. These spicy scenes are very spicy, so I don't think that I can get into too many more details, but you can just imagine that's their friendly interactions, how intense things can get. Just a quick important note, we just reached 200 subscribers on YouTube, so thank you so much. We might have gone down on that because I did a charity event and people are bigots, but I don't know why they're following me, because I'm a trans author and I always talk about like social things that we're all human and need to protect each other for. We are doing a 200 subscriber party live stream. It's going to be multi-streamed here on youtube.com/@riverkaiauthor/live, or you can come to Twitch, where we usually do our streams every single week, and that is twitch.tv/riverkai. So I'm looking forward to seeing you. It's going to be on Wednesday, which is tomorrow, February 11th at 1 1 p.m. Pacific time. Just in case you're curious about the charity event I mentioned, we are still doing that. We are almost done with it, but we are supporting the National Immigration Law Center in order to help protect our neighbors here in the United States who are being directly attacked and impacted by ICE and our rogue government. So what the National Immigration Law Center does, they are providing lawyers and advocates to try to help people in these very traumatizing, dangerous situations. So that is not work that I can personally do, but our community can help with that still by raising funds for them. And so far we have already beat both of my goals, which was just $200 so far. The first one was $100. So thank you so much for your support. It really feels nice to be able to do these things because, like I said, this is not my area of expertise, but it's something that I care about, and I think we should all make sure to keep an eye on the people surrounding us who live in the same world that we do, and if they are suffering, it's really nice to be able to support them in some way. So thanks for helping to make that happen together as a community, and I'm looking forward to seeing what we can do in these last 2 days. I hope that you are having a great week so far, and I will see you again next time. Goodbye for now.